have faith in God is not a stagnant state. It's a journey. As a believer, we should grow in our knowledge of God and His Word. Walk with Alan Cutting and many other believers as together we walk the believer's journey.
Aloha and welcome again to the Believer's Journey. It's so nice to have you back and joining us as we venture into another week and another topic. Today we're going to talk about the Gospel of John, and John is the writer, and we have a few areas and topics and scriptures we want to share with you. My guest today is Mardochee Estinvil, who is an author. He's written a book. We're going to talk with him and about him, and he's going to be my guest today, who we're going to discuss about the gospel. Anyway, Mardochee, why don't you say hello?
Hello, everyone. Like he stated, my name is Mardochee Estinvil. Mr. Allen, thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor and a privilege to be here on the Believer's Journey. I'm very glad.
Mardochee and I were introduced a few months ago, I guess, by email.
Yeah.
And so we've been going back and forth on the email from a friend of ours, and it's been real pleasure. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you. And I really want our audience to know about you, is because I'm impressed. I'm impressed of who you are, what you represent, who you represent, and I wish when I was young, your age, I was as wise as you are, because that's something I really see in you. So.
Thank you. Again, my name is Mardochee Estinvil. Sometimes people call me Brother M. I was born and grew up in Haiti. Haiti is in the Caribbean, about 2 hours from Florida. It's one of the poorest countries. I was raised in a Christian family. My dad is a pastor. My mom is a pastor's wife, and she involved a lot in social needs activities over there in Haiti. And I inherited a strong faith from my grandmother, my mother's mom. And whenever I like to talk about my testimony, I always begin there. And the thing about it, growing up in Haiti with way life was, especially went through an earthquake in January 12, 2010, in which the country is still recovering from. There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of things that you learn about life, and you just feel a motivation or passion that you're willing to go forward.
Now, I know that Haiti, like a few other countries in the world, they're very, very poor. Probably, if not the poorest or one of the poorest in the Americas. Is that true?
In terms of economic, one of the poorest in the world, and of course, I think some studies have revealed that one of the poorest here in the continent of America. The needs are a lot. The chances that people have to go to schools are very little. I think one of the times I was making a research, about 50% or 51% were literate. What I mean by had a 6th grade education. So it's a country of that went to so many struggles, that faces so many issues. But at the end of the day, I do think that God's move everywhere, and God's put people in different places to make different impacts.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with countries being poor, as we've talked, and I've mentioned on my show many times. I try to go to the Republic of Moldova every year if possible. Obviously, last year we couldn't go anywhere, and I'm looking at this year how we're doing it, and they're the poorest country in all of Europe, Eastern and Western Europe. So it's interesting to see, how people manage and so forth. And I know that a lot of people in the United States tend not to understand, unless you actually live in poverty, live on the street. A lot of people in the United States don't understand the economic lack of the value of the economic hurt and pain and suffering that people go through in trying just to survive.
One of the ways I love to put it is that in different countries we face different needs, different issues, and like you mentioned, it's so true. I think that in some countries the struggle is more financial. economic, political instability. But in other countries, there's also their different needs too. So it's how we navigate to it. But you're on point. You know, there's so many opportunities here that are different from different places. Like, for example, schools is that everyone can go to school. Everyone is like provide to the government, you know. But in some other countries, third world countries, especially like Haiti, it's way different. Not everyone have that opportunity. But again, I think it's just that everywhere there's problems. Everywhere there's problem. It's just different problems, and also it's the challenge for the gospel to adapt to its challenge and bring forth a message that is relevant to each of these different group of people.
Yes. Now, I noticed as we've talked and as I've read, something you say, I believe it's in your book, you have a passion, or maybe it's just in our discussion, you have a passion for theology, and you've always had a passion for theology, I guess even as a child, and you accepted the call of the ministry after the earthquake in Haiti in January of 2010.
Yeah. I grew up in a Christian family. The one thing both of my older brother, of course, they're going to be watching this, Fano and Zachary, both of them always wanted to be a pastor. But as a kid, what I always wanted was preaching. I love preaching. I love theology, and I've always liked to raise certain curious questions to my dad. And I cannot be talking without mentioning my mom's name, Mardochee Estinvil, because she's going to be watching it. So as a kid, I grew up with that passion of theology, you know, and let's not forget, I'm married too, so I have to say hi to my lovely baby. You know, actually, I just on a side note, I call my wife my lovely baby sugar. So that's how. So hi to you, honey, and hi to my daughter, Gracely. So I grew up with that passion in theology, that motivation for theology, but all my calling was just becoming a preacher. So in 2008, I become converted. I accepted. I took my personal decision. Despite my passion, I was the last one in my family to take such decision. And, you know, my life was not, I love theology, but I wasn't into ministry until after the earthquake. And then I remember that night I raised one question, and the question was, what is the most important things in life? And the answer that I came up with was serving people with a loving heart and be there for other people. Because the reality is, we can do different things, but at the end of the day, what is the most meaningful thing? So that's pretty much of my story and the passion that I grew up with for theology. And then as inspiration start coming, then the books start coming.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's really not the end of your story. I have so much more here to talk about. And one of the things that I've read about and we've talked about is that you've been involved with your mom. Your mom has a nonprofit organization called First Fruit Haiti. And I guess that had a major impact on you with your mom's nonprofit.
That does have a major impact on me. But again, it's the total dynamic. For example, if we're looking at ministry from the perspective of here in the United States, if you have a member that needs medical assistance, they can easily call 911 and 911 would be there. But when you're looking at the context in Haiti, it's totally different. When somebody goes to an issue, it's not like they can call 911, they can call the police. So you have those various needs. Like, for example, you have the medical need. You have education, people going to school. And you have all of those needs that are presented, and at the end of the day, as a minister, the question you raise is, how can you touch these people's life? How can you be a presence to them? So you have those needs that created that needs for answer, and that's how it all launched, and that's how my mom started involving, and she's been doing it for a long time, I believe since before 1985, so she has a ton of experience. So she helped in various different areas, such as farming, education, medical assistant. It's just a ministry that keeps growing as the needs keep growing. But the reality is, none of it would be possible without help of great missionaries, especially from here in the United States.
So your mom's ministry there, First Fruit Haiti, it has a lot to do with just helping people regardless of their needs. Is that true?
Regardless of the need, and we try to go behind the umbrella of the church. What I mean by it is not just stuck into a building, but going to different communities. So we reach out to all group of people and present the gospel in a different form. I don't know if I answered to that question, but yes, we reach out to every group of people we can.
Well, and that's important because as you've mentioned that it actually is something that has helped you, formed you, and inspired you. You have a background of all these things that you want to build a rescue for with the needs of the people. I mean, and Jesus was this way. He didn't just walk into a town and say, you all need to be saved. He walked in the town and healed people, fed people, cared for people, talked with people, prayed for people. And so he met their needs on a physical and emotional area as well as their spiritual areas.
And you're pretty right on track when you're reading the Gospels, and you see that Jesus being hands-on and answering to the need of the people. And I think that's a perfect way of doing ministry, is being present. And we can talk for days and just talk about scripture, but when we integrate into their needs, when we integrate to the reality they find themselves in, and we become that light shining. You see, not that we are the light, but we have the light in us.
Yeah,
that is Christ.
Now tell me about your tell your audience about your grandmother.
Basically, my grandmother, and she's my mom's mom. She passed away in 2012. After she got married, she couldn't have kids. And I wrote about her in the book. And she did not come from a Christian family. So for her conversion, she had to leave her whole family with her husband and start a new journey. She burned her clothes. It was a radical transformation to detach from her own heritage and to start a new beginning. So she started new at the age when my mom was 5 and her sister was really young. Their dad passed away. So she had to raise, she was a single mom growing up, 2 daughters in the country. And she had to fight with life a lot. But what I've learned from her is her story living out the gospel was one of the most powerful things ever. And I try to gain a lot from that wisdom, because one of the miracles that I've experienced, and it was the first time, is at her funeral, over 8 people come to Christ, and all of them come to one basis. They were all people from her community, and they all shared that statement, that the life that we've seen this person live, that we want to live it. And what's more impressive about her, I was always close to her. I think my older brother was her favorite, but we got to share those things. But the thing that I really learned from her is, after her death, I know more about her than I know about when she was alive. And we spent 17 years together. I would go to her house often. But the wisdom that I've gained is still today. Whenever I go to her community, you have somebody that comes to you and said, hey, this is how she helped me one day, And and there's a lot of people still today that are becoming Christian just because of the way she lived out the gospel. I remember one man tell me, your grandmother would always open the door for me and invite me to sit and talk about life. And he said later on, a few years, I committed my life to Christ because the life that she lived is what I wanted to. So it's just being a process of it's a blessing to have had a grandma like this. One of these faith action that I've seen from her life, one time my family, we had to go to a meeting, and my older brother was not feeling well, so she wasn't too far away, so we went to her house, and I told her, okay, my older brother is not feeling well. They tell me to mention that we would like you to spend a few hours with her as we're going to cover those other details. And immediately I told her that. She said, okay, that's fine. And then I remember she locked the door, and I was close, I was curious to know, and she started praying. She said, Lord, I'm bowing down on my knees, and we have a talk that I don't want any of my kids to struggle while I'm alive. So it was a spiritual action, and then as we get back home with her, my older brother felt way better than he felt before that. So it was a blessing, and even though she passed away, I'm still grateful to God for giving me such a grandma that I could see that live out the gospel, and I'm really blessed to talk about her.
Well, one of the reasons why I really admire you is because you've taken in, your parents, you've taken in your grandmother, and the wisdom and the lifestyle that they have been a model for you. You've actually grabbed a hold of it. Most of us, human type people, we tend to shrug it off until someday when we're 35, or mostly men, 35 or older, we don't grow up until then and don't really take on this to realize we need to grow up. We need to take on that responsibility. I was that way. I didn't really take on things. I had a pastor. I've mentioned him several times on this show. He's like a father to me. His name's Lon Ekdahl. And he was wise as a young man. And he imparted wisdom to me, and it just like it went in one ear and came out the other. It just didn't happen until I finally got myself together as I was older, and it kind of came about. Luckily, he didn't give up on me, so that tends to happen. Now, we've been talking about, off and on, we mentioned the book. So Mardochee has written a book, and it's called, this is a cover of it, if you can see it. It's called Relax, Jesus' Peace in the Midst of It All. Okay? It's an amazing book. It really is amazing. When I first picked it up, it was hard for me to put it down.
Thank you.
So, but you really go through some things in here that most people don't write till they're 50 or 60 years old. I mean, you really have captured some ideas and some areas of life and feel and psychological things that are usually brought in later on in people's lives that write about it. But you really do a good job, and it's on my website. If you go to my website where the books are, I do have that listed there. You can click on it. It goes right to Amazon. We don't get a dime out of this. And if you want to purchase the book, I'll tell you something really funny about the book, and we've laughed about this, is that back when Mardochee sent me the book, he actually sent me 2 books. And so I took one, and so I kind of looked at him, I glanced at him real quickly, and so I gave my wife one to read, and I took it, and then when I went to read it, I'm reading this, and right under the title it says Volume 1. So I went, oh no, I gave my wife Volume 2. So I had to go over there and look at it, and they're both Volume 1, not thinking or knowing whether there is a Volume 2, but and as you said, you're planning on maybe possibly writing a second one, which may be the Volume 2. But I thought that was so funny. It's a really cute little story. But I love your book. I mean, it's just, I really recommend. I only put books on my website that I've read and that I highly recommend, and it's one of them. And I like your introduction, your chapters in here. Some of the things I really like is when you talk about forgiveness, things that people have a hard time with. And one of the things we've talked a lot about on my show are people going through difficult trials, difficult things. And I want to talk about that for a second. In your book, you talk about the idea what most people do is they get into a trial and they're looking for the way out, looking for when things are there, and they're not focusing on what they're going through, not realizing that Jesus is there with them, and there's a lesson to be learned. There's a thing to grab a hold of. Can you share with that?
I think that was one thought that emerged, and that probably gave birth to this book. The question was, how do we cope with difficulties? How do we cope with trial? How do we cope with different moments that we cannot explain in life? And I've realized that the tendency is that we hold on to a sermon, or we hold to a message of hope that everything will be done easy, one day we'll be escaping. So it's almost like we're trying to escape the problem that we are at now. And some other thoughts that sometimes we waste theologically is, why is it happening to us? You see what I mean? And we can go on and on, list all those questions, but at the end of the day, the reality is that we do face them. So how do we go through that process about it. And what does it mean to be a Christian and dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress, dealing with certain things? And what I've come to understand is that there's no promises that said when you become a Christian, you won't face difficulties, you won't face trouble. So, but what I've learned is that Christ said, when you face this difficult moment, I will be with you. So, living in the presence of God, living in Christ, what does it mean? Facing a trouble as a Christian, how does it look like? So those were the very thought that emerged, and at some point, some night I couldn't even sleep because I had to go write it. And those were the questions that's really give birth to this book, because at the end of the day, I don't think we can try to avoid them. We can try for them to be gone, and of course nobody wants to suffer, but at the end of the day, what can we take away from the problem? And sometimes those problems are blessings.
Yeah, and actually all through the Bible it talks about, when we're in a low place, He is there. When we're in a high place, He is there. It doesn't matter. And so whether it's Old Testament teaching or New Testament teaching, God is there with us regardless of where we are, going through with us where we are. And I think that's important to understand. I like one of the things you said, and this is just paraphrasing it, is that as we're going through the difficulty, there's a lesson that we need to learn as we're going through it, and Jesus is there ready for us basically to walk with us through it so we can learn our lesson and then come out the other end.
Yeah, and you are right on point, and it's very hard to add anything, but I'm just going to illustrate it a different way. Is it's a journey. It's a journey. It's not that, oh, I'm waiting for this person or this person is waiting for me over there. Because I think it's almost like, okay, I'm going to Houston, I'm going to meet that person in Houston. It's not something that, okay, I'm going to meet Christ there or Christ's going to meet me there. It's that we are into the journey together. So how does it feel to be in the journey together? So those are the very important factors. But I do think the challenge is the mindset in which we are viewing and facing several things in life.
And actually, the things that I got out of the book were these areas. It seemed like you highlighted this through the book. And one is hope. You talk a lot about hope, or even in between the lines, you see that there is a hope as we walk through our journey. There's hope in Christ. There's hope in one another. The other thing I see is the fact that it's not only Jesus that we have this relationship, it's also one another. And we're there to help one another. You talk about that when there's depression and we're going through hardship, and we need to be there for one another to help each other. I mean, you bring that about. So I think the idea that it's a journey, of course, I totally believe that's why our show is called The Believer's Journey, is all about the fact that we walk through life. And I think that why I teach a lot in the Old Testament is because that's what it teaches in the Old Testament. We walk through a journey, and God is there to help us along through. We will fall, we will break our leg or whatever we do, but God is there to help us up, to continue on our journey, to become more like Him and live for Him. And I think your book really well puts that together. And
you're perfectly right. You're perfectly right. And when I started writing the book, I saw it like this: me and God, me and God. And then, as a writer, you want to be relevant, and I want to be touching other people's reality. So what I did is I started having interviews, conversation with different people that went to some struggles, and people that were really open and honest. And I'm tremendously grateful. And what I've discovered is, yes, there is that relationship between you and God in the presence, but your neighbor, your friend, the church you go to, the people that are brothers and sisters in Christ, really the way the dynamic is really helpful. So you are right on track on this.
So I recommend the book, and really it's something that I think that everybody should read. It's one of those books that everybody should read. It's really amazing. I want to say a little bit more about you. Besides that you've written a book, you have a double major in business leadership and biblical theology. And right now you're working on your Masters of Divinity, and you're going to be graduating in May. So anybody out there who's in the San Antonio area, he does preach. And he does love to speak. And so if you have the need or want to, or you like what's being said here, and you like what Mardochee is talking about, by all means, contact us and we'll forward it to him. Or you have his website you can go to and send him an email. And basically, you know, he's available and open to preach. And I've already decided that there are times, because I'm really picky about who teaches my Sunday school classes, that I've already decided that there will be times I'll want to ask Mardochee to come and teach in my class. So that'll be kind of cool.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
So anyway, also I wanted to say that when you're all said and done, you plan on going back to Haiti and to minister there.
Yeah, actually, I was in ministry in Haiti, and right about I'm gonna end with my high school. The fear was, what's next? You know, college. How do you pay for it? Unfortunately, my parents couldn't. And one of the blessings was a missionary team that came from Wayzata in Minnesota. They came down in Haiti and they were touched by it. So they were actually the one that supported me. So I came out from a mission field to come study. And my wife and I both, and I actually met my wife in Haiti too. She's from Minnesota. She's a very passionate woman about ministry. She loves ministry. And that's basically our goal. And the idea of it too is that, you know, I just have an opportunity. I'm not the smartest Haitian ever, you know, but unfortunately not many youth has that opportunity that I was given. That to, you know, it's just a blessing. You know, there's no way you can describe it. And just going back and serve them, especially within the education capacity, because there's a lot of them that, you know, they graduate from high school, but what's next? Can they afford the idea of going to college? Can they afford it all? You know, and that's basically one of my goals in the future. My wife and I, we were thinking in 2018, we were projecting 2021 as the year, but unfortunately, the political conditions have been really bad over there, and we kind of rethinking things, and we not rethinking things as we're not going, but we thinking of how can we start it. Virtually, or how can we start it from distance? So those are the things that we're thinking, because at the end of the day, I do believe that there will have struggles in this earth, but as long we believers are on this earth, the mindset to pursue mission must always fulfill.
Yeah, and we've talked about how it is difficult, especially today's day. I've seen the churches that they've gone virtual, and there's a lot of drop off, and it's difficult.
It's challenging, but I think the mindset and then the focus from the Spirit will always guide us to some form of wisdom.
And I think that I know that I've seen a lot of different ideas about worship and so forth. And a lot of people believe that they have to go to a church, and that's going to a building, getting together is your worship. And I've seen that a lot in the United States since this coronavirus thing has happened. And I really teach it's not true. I mean, the Bible teaches us that, you know, worship is giving of yourself to Him as a gift of yourself to do what He wants you to do, live that way. The way we work with one another is to assemble and get together. Well, they're still assembling in Zoom. I mean, we would get on there, and I have had Zoom where I've had 20, 30 people on there. Right now I'm teaching a class where I've got 12 people on Zoom and 12 people in a class. So I do both at the same time, but it's still a matter of gathering together, even when it's virtual, because it's not a matter of being together. A lot of people will go to a church, and this is a sad thing in our country. People will go to a church, they'll sing songs, listen to the minister, and they leave. And there's no real interaction. They might be, oh, hi, how are you, to the person who sits next to them. But really, the church is about uplifting and building and praying and caring for one another. And a lot of that's gone away, even when they come together in the same building. And you can do that or more on Zoom. It's not any different.
I agree with you. And one of the things that happened though is the church was not prepared for COVID. Like it's something that just come out, and not, unfortunately, not all of them had the same capacity. So I agree with you on this one. One of the reflections that I started to make it pre-COVID, and then COVID happened. I was like, okay. It's like when you're looking at the gospel, when you're seeing the gospel, one of the very important places for the gospel was the street. John the Baptist did his ministry on the street. Jesus, as a matter of fact, speak a lot and was always passing by. He did many healings in the street, and many even happened in the street. And the image was that the street was where people gathers together. That's where people come together. So that was a way to get the audience, meeting people right with their needs. And the reality today is that the social media have becoming that street. So how do we adapt with that street? How do we communicate? And how do we do it in an effective way? I think those are some of the challenges that the church is currently facing. However, I do believe there's going to be a way out to it. I don't know what it's look like, but I do know that the Spirit is at work, and it will work to countless people.
Yeah. Before we get on to our topic, I wanted to ask this question, because I know many people that I've listened to and I've talked to, their understanding about Haiti is predominantly a country that has a religion of voodoo. So you don't hear a lot about Christianity in Haiti. Can you tell us what the temperature is like as far as the religious aspects and so forth?
You know, from my experience, I realize that people have different opinions, different ideas, and I tend to live them with that opinion. However, I've had the chance to lead several mission trips too, and one of them, every time I lead a mission trip, the outcome is that there is that perception of Haiti, and then when the people go to Haiti, actually the last day, before the last day they leave, all of them are crying because they don't want to leave that country. So I tend to leave people with their own perception, but at the end of the day, once they're coming out to understand the reality, they will see it different, because it's one of the most loving places you can go to. You know, it's one of the most loving place. And what I just want to outline is the importance of religion and the gospel in Haiti. For example, upon a study I was making, it was 80 to 90% of schools that are run in Haiti are run through a religious organization or a private institution.
Wow.
So this is a place where religion have a good impact. Now, different people can have different arguments, different studies, but I think once the political condition calm down, it's best the person go with the perception, visit, and come back and start sharing. Because I've from my experience of leading mission trip, I've seen that many perception it's not safe. There's that problem, and then in the mission trip, I've seen many people tell me that have changed their life. That has been a life-changing experience. So let's just leave the mystery as a mystery for people to unpack.
You know, one thing you said was about people being loving. I think I've found that when I go to Moldova, that, such a poor country, that the people, because they're poor, depend on one another. They interact with one another. They help one another. They'll give the shirt off their back to help people, to make sure they're taken care of. And I think it's because they're poor. In the United States, we don't have as much of that because we're pretty much self-dependent, or independent rather. A lot of us have our apartments that we don't want to bother our neighbors or our houses, and so we don't have that dependence on one another like poor countries or those who struggle to make ends meet or life together, like in Haiti or like in Moldova, like in Ukraine, areas like that where it's very poor and people do that.
I really understand. I really understand what you're saying. And the other factor that I wanted to bring to perspective too is the construction of culture have an influence to that too. And the example I'm using, I've known many great people here from the U.S. And the difference in examining, one of the things I've seen in the construction of different structure is culture, is that here in the United States, we are living in a very fast space, so everything has to be done in a timely manner, very quick. So it almost seems that people don't have that much of time, but that doesn't mean that they are not as loving. I just wanted to bring that emphasis because it's the way we view time, the way we use time, influence our personalities somehow too. So I just wanted to bring that to perspective.
So, and I highly encourage, anyone and everyone, if you have the capability or the possibility to travel to another country, to another area as a mission trip, whether it be 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, I highly encourage you to do so. I remember when I lived in Hawaii and we had mission teams come out to Hawaii for a mission trip, and people would all make fun of it. Oh, you're going to Hawaii for a mission, ha ha ha. But really, there's such a need there because it's really difficult. Where I lived on Maui, we had to buy this land, and we had houses we needed to build for places for the pastors to live. And so there are teams that came out to help build these houses, and we really needed that. And so basically, if there are anybody that has any kind of gifts or capabilities to do stuff and you want to be blessed, I mean, mission trips are wonderful. They really are.
It is really wonderful, and I just want to reinforce it again. It's really, really important because it changes your worldview, the way you see life, the way you see God, the way you think of life, the way you think of your finance, the way you think of your health. It just changes everything. For some people, it has been a journey of transformation from the sense of finding meaning. From others, it has been. So I'm just reinforcing what you say. It's very important to any other country. Of course, once the political condition calm down, my job is to advocate for more people to visit Haiti. And please forgive me, I have to be biased in that one, but. Again, the point is visiting other places will shape the way you think.
And what's really interesting in my situation, because I've gone to Moldova so many times and the missionaries come here, there's actually a missionary, his name is Radu Kukos, and he's become like my best friend. So we're really close friends, and we talk on Zoom or Messenger or whatever, Skype. We visit each other. He stays at my house, I stay at his house, and we're just really good friends. So we've created this bond, and there's a few other missionaries in the same country that we're very close with. So, but yeah, I hope everybody really understands that this is a big thing because you get to look, like you said, you get to look at a different world view, and you start to accept that and understand the bigger picture rather than your just own little area.
Yeah, it's a life-changing experience.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Gospel of John. So I'm going to read the passage that we're going to talk about, and once we get through this, we're going to go on in more areas. But in John chapter 20, verses 19 to 23, this is what it says. It says, "Then the same day that evening," this being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for the fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst of them and said, "Peace be with you." Now, just a side note here, this is after Jesus had gone to the cross and had died on the cross, and he was buried. So this is after the fact. He had risen, and all of a sudden he appears to the disciples in this room and says, "Peace be with you." And it goes on and says, when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. So Jesus said to them, "Peace to you." He said this again, "Peace to you. And as the Father has sent me, I also send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, then they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." And I think that is verse 23. Anyway, so let's talk about that. This is your passage. This is your love of your passage. Go ahead and help us with this.
It's one of my favorite passages, and the reason why is because it challenged me to think of doing evangelization from a different perspective. I think when looking at it from Matthew's perspective, a lot of times we see it as a list. We need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this. But in this passage, what I've learned is that there is that calling and that invitation to reveal Christ in the way we live out. So the challenge of evangelization that brings forth into this passage is to live it out. Live it out. And when looking at the context, the first thing we know is that the disciples were in fear, so they locked themselves in a womb. So now you might ask why? Because their masters were killed. And you see that their masters killed, they are hidden, right? They are inside of that womb. So it's just, you can sense the presence of fear in there. And the reality of today is, when we talk of mission, the first thing we can feel is the presence of fear. You know, whatever you want to do, there's always that fear that present us and that can prevent us. And in the middle of their fear, Jesus appeared to them and said, "Peace be with you." Now, what's interesting, the first time I read the passage, is I hold that conviction that Jesus told them exactly what they wanted to hear. But the reality is that the phrase that he used was a common greeting. It was almost saying, "Hey, hello, how you doing?" It was almost like shalom. So that was a greeting way. But if you're observing the passage, you see that changes take from fear to overjoy. And what have happened is, where does the dynamic changes? And what I've come to see is that it was the presence of Christ that changes the whole environment from fear to overjoy. And then you find out that second repetition of "peace be with you," and it's almost like, calm down, guys, there's bigger thing ahead of us. It's like a fan. It's like, you know, you were sad and something happened. It's like, I don't know, it's like you're watching that NBA game and then your team is losing, and then that 1 point come in and everybody's jumping, overjoyed come out, and Jesus is just saying them, "Peace be with you." It's like, calm down, guys, there's bigger thing again. He's reminding that peace. That word peace is irene, which means tranquility. And what I love in this passage is that phrase, "As the Father has sent me, I'm sending you. In the same way the Father sent me into this earth, I'm sending you to do the same." And John, the author of this gospel, is one of my favorite. Sometimes I call him John the theologian because of the emphasis he put. And unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he doesn't put an emphasis too much on what Jesus did. Even his miracles, he doesn't really identify them as miracles. He identifies them as a sign pointing out to something. If you have a sign, that means it's pointing out to something. And you know, we can go all geeky about John, but there's three things that I've learned from John about Jesus in his gospel. Is first, that concept of revelation, that he revealed that divine presence to us, that the divine presence dwelled among us and be with us. You see what I mean? And there's several areas, like for example, the woman that was caught in adultery, that revelation wasn't one of blame, but instead was one of forgiveness. It was one of go and sin no more. When people wanted to stone that person, and even the woman at the well, if you're looking at the text, if you're looking carefully in the observation, and Jesus brings forth a new revelation. Even in the first chapter, I forgot his name, but when that man said, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" And imagine you come from the United States and somebody randomly said, "Hey, can anything come from the United States?" And it's easy because it's your country, you feel triggered by it. Or if you say, "Can anything come from good from Haiti?" I'll feel triggered by it. And what Jesus looked into this man wasn't his statement, but his honesty. So that challenge to reveal Christ, that challenge in the way we see people, the challenge in the way we do things, and it's and looking from that perspective, it's transform who we are, what we do, and how we do things. And then the second R after revelation is relationship. Like for example, when you're looking at John's gospel, he doesn't put a big emphasis on teaching that happened in crowd. it's mostly like one-on-one conversation. So in John's Gospel, you see Jesus from a relational perspective. So, and to carry out that relationship, that it's not just about preaching a big sermon to a crowd and bring too many people to Christ. And if it happened, to God's be the glory. You see what I mean? But evangelization is also the way I react, I interact with my coworker, my neighbor, my friend, you know, the one that is close to me. How do I relate, that relationship aspect? And all of this led to the last hour, which is reconciling the world to Him. And the calling is in that same way. I'm sending you. But one of the things that one time I was reading the passage, because I like to read it, and that really was challenging to me, is that, has the Father sent me, I'm sending you. Well, He sent them to where? To the world that crucified Him. Mm-hmm. So that same world that crucified Him, He's sending. And you can have that vision. Okay, if a father knows, or if a brother knows that that place was scary, why would he send you into that place? And you can even raise the thought that maybe Jesus loved the world more than the disciples, but what I've come to understand is that He loved them both. And the tendency is that we can hold to that idea or that mindset that God only loved me, that God only cared for me, but He also cared for the person outside. And the path of growth sometimes is not just inside of the womb, but it's also out there in the field. So there is that dynamic of love. Has the Father sent me, I'm sending you to that world that hurt me. But in that world, there are people that I love. In that world, I love them, and I want to reconcile with them. And in reconciling with them, the path is to revealing and building relationship. So it's the dynamic that I really like about it when I'm unpacking this passage.
I noticed that it seems real evident that Jesus came because He loved the people, and even though He came to those who were Jews, and He also helped and ministered those who were not. And when he said multiple times, I do the will of the Father, I came because of the Father and I are one. He just had that discussion with them in the upper room before he even went to the cross. So there's that relationship that He is showing that the Father has with them, and that the Father has sent Him to do certain work. And it's almost like He says, now I'm passing the baton to you to carry on. He establishes the church there in the upper room, basically, when He talks to the disciples, and he does all these little things like washing their feet. He answers all these little questions, and He gives them the thing about loving one another as I have loved you. The world will know that you're mine by the way you love one another. So He is bringing in the world. In chapter 17, when He does His famous prayer, He prays for the disciples, and He prays for those in the world, and the world those to come. So His care really is about everyone. I believe that it's because He desires that everyone turn to Him. I mean, I believe that it's easy to live as a believer. I really do believe, I think Jesus taught us that. However, it's the actual turning to Him and giving up what you have that we have, that is that selfish stuff that we carry to shed before we finally say okay, and then understanding the lifestyle. I think maybe at the time when they're in that upper room, or in that room, when Jesus comes and shows them the scars, and then says this, the Father sent me, I send you, it's almost like maybe they're understanding now, because they obviously didn't understand before Jesus was crucified, but now that He's risen, things might have popped in their mind about everything He has said, and now it's coming to be. I mean, what do you think?
And your last point is right on track, that misunderstanding. And I believe it's John chapter 14 where Philip asked Jesus that question, show us the Father. And then He said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That means he's pointing out to Him as one that reveals the fullness of the Father into it. And I think that when thinking of the ministry of Christ, a lot of times the tendency is to think of the crucifixion and the miracles, but the thing that I think that is very, very important and necessary when thinking of Christ's ministry is the aspect of revelation, how he demonstrated the love of the Father to other people.
Yeah. You know, there's a verse in John that they say is the key verse, which is John 20:31. I'm going to read this. It says this, and this is John talking. He says, "But these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ." Now, the word Christ obviously means the Messiah or the Anointed One, okay? The Son of God. "And that believing you may have life in His name. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. And if you retain, they are also retained." But basically, he's talking about that Jesus has done this. He has come about, and all these things are, like you said, a sign. And if you believe in Him, it's for the reason to believe in Him and follow Him. So that's a key verse in the Bible, in John. However, there's a key word in the book of John. It's the word believe. Now, there is a misconception of the word believe. We have that misconception because of our own modern day, well, it's the translation of the word, you know, and our definition is what the problem is. So the word believe is written 99 times in the Gospel of John. It's written about a total of 130 times in all of his writings, okay? So the word believe that they translate from is what they call, in the Greek, the word is pisteuo. Okay, so pisteuo is the Greek word for what they've translated into the word believe. The problem is pisteuo is an active verb. Okay, but believe is a passive verb. Now, if you go to your dictionary and look at what the word believe means, I have it right here. It says it's something that we understand to be true, to trust in something. And that's what we take as the word believe. So when we are given the idea that if you believe in Him, if you understand that it's true, then you have everlasting life. Or if you read in Romans that you confess with your mouth, believe in your heart, in other words, if you understand it's true, then you are a believer and you have everlasting life. However, that's not what it means. And so when we go to pisteuo, it's an active verb, and the definition is not, and the way to understand the word pisteuo is not a one-word translation, like into believe. It actually has a whole understanding in a phrase. I'm going to read you the phrase that I have written here. So pisteuo really is an act of following. It's responding in obedience. It's to entrust, which is an active way of trusting. It's entrusting one's life into something. What do you think of that?
You're perfectly on track. It is something that is ongoing. It's not something we did or we already done. It's something that is ongoing. It's to keep on having trust, keep on believing. And the other emphasis I wanted to bring into John when he's using that word believe to, he's also calling his readers into a relationship.
Exactly.
That's why it has to be something that keep on going. So he's inviting you to join a journey. And I believe in just John's gospel, that word believe, he used it, I think 1/3 of the time it appears in the New Testament is found in John's gospel. I don't know if I'm wrong in this one, but he put a strong emphasis that you may go on having a relationship with Christ. You may go on believing. You may go on continuing trusting.
Yeah.
You know?
And in fact, I even got more convicted about how I believe in this and how I feel about this and how I teach it is when I went to Moldova, believe it or not. I would talk to people about, believing in Jesus and so forth, and knowing you need to read the scriptures and all this. And all of a sudden, one of the missionaries said to me, actually, you need to teach it differently. You need to say that it's important that you follow the teachings of Jesus. And as I understood why the dynamics in Moldova is because they are competing, or against a church there, that it's all about the understanding of God rather than the following of the relationship. So now that I've read and studied more about the actual language, it is a following, it is an obedience, it is an active part of a relationship. But it's not only an active part of a relationship with Jesus alone, it's an active part of a relationship with other believers. And if you don't believe that, read First John, and he's very blunt about it. That if you hate one another, believers, then you're dead and you're no part of God. If you don't love another brethren, it says that you're deceiving yourself and you're not a part of God. So basically, it's all about the relationship and depending and loving and living with one another.
And you're perfectly right. You're on track on this. And I think one of the reasons why is that a lot of times when reading scripture, a lot of times the issue or the struggle that we face is that we jump into conclusion and what does it mean to me, or how do I apply it. But the first question that I love to indicate is, when these words were saying for the first audience, what did it mean? What was the goal aim at? And I think that you're looking at it not just from what it means today, but also what it originally meant to the first reader and what it's calling us to do today.
Yeah. Really, so I'm real big on the teaching about belief, because the pistuo, same thing with faith. Faith, the word is pistis, is also an active verb. People stop in Hebrews 1 with the word faith, because that's what faith is, but they forget that the whole chapter is all about faith. What is faith? Well, when Noah built the ark, that was his faith, that he obeyed God when he was told. And it's the same thing. So it's really kind of interesting. A couple more things I wanted to bring up about the Gospel of John is, in the Gospel of John, unlike, and you brought this out about, the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's not about basically what he did. However, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are about, it's like a chronological history of, day 1, day 2, day 3. It goes on. It's an ongoing life.
Yeah, they're trying to cover the narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
Where in the Gospel of John, it's all about, he picked out 20 different days, put it together in his book. So we don't have an ongoing narrative of Jesus' life. We have 20 picked out days that John pulls together to show, as you said, signs that Jesus is in fact the Christ, that they would believe and follow him and become believers and followers of Jesus. This is the very purpose of the book.
And there's I think a scholar put it this way: there's different angle at telling a story. Some people tell, okay, that's what the person does. Matthew, on the other hand, that's what he does, but in relation to that context, to a Jewish context. Luke tends to be more chronological. And then the thing with John is that he's not centered himself too much on what he did, but who he was. So, and that's the argument he's making. And this is where he brings forth that he brings forth several paradoxes or several challenging themes in his gospel, but it's how he balanced both the divinity and the humanity of Jesus in one gospel.
Yeah.
That is phenomenal.
I mean, there's no parables in the Gospel of John. There's only 7 miracles in the Gospel of John. And each miracle, I have written down that the miracles actually represent something. For example, changing the water to wine, it proves that Jesus is the master over creation. Heals the government official, it proves that Jesus is not limited by geography, because he healed him from afar. And goes on. Healing the man by the pool proves that Jesus isn't limited by time. So there's all these miracles that bring about a teaching of the sign of where he is and his power, and the fact that, like we read in the first chapter of John, that Jesus is himself God, who became a man. And I think this is so important, because John also shows the fact that Jesus is divine.
One of the things I love adding to what you said is how he balanced the divinity, and he himself distinguished the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and put all of them into perspective.
Yeah.
And
I know I've had people have a hard time with the fact that, well, Jesus is called the Son of God. Well, actually, Jesus called himself the Son of Man. We'll start there. But the problem is people don't understand. Well, he's either God or he's man or he's the Son of God and so forth. But the whole idea that makes it a little difficult with some people is that Jesus is 100% God and he's 100% man. So he is all in one, which is different for people to grasp. But when we read the first chapter, we read verses 14 through 18, we get that idea that Jesus became God, because it says in the beginning was the Word became flesh, and was God, and Word in 14 became flesh and dwelt among them. And we understand that the Word, who is God, became flesh. Now we're talking about the very fact that Jesus was in fact there from the beginning and before all time.
You're right, and I think one struggle that we face a lot of time in our theology is that issue of picking either or. So either we want the divinity or we want the humanity, but at the end of the day, I think there is a positive message in both of them. Because when you're looking at the humanity, you're looking at at a person who lived in life, who went through some struggle.
Well, we could talk about this all day. Our time is up. John is my favorite writer. I guess he's your favorite writer. And the Gospel of John is probably my favorite book. That and First John comes right after it. So basically, those of you should read John. And he's got such a simple message. And for those of you who are mature Christians, he's got such a deep message. And it's for everyone. Yeah,
it's for everyone. I just wanted to say hi to two good friends. David Shoddy, he's in Haiti. Really dedicated, really good guy. The second one is Amos Gabriel. He's like a mentor. He's a writer too. So I just want to make sure I salute both of them.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today on our show. Don't forget to go to our website and look at this book and order the book, Relax. Again, if you need somebody to speak at your church or a function, Mardochee is available. And pray for him. Pray for his family. He's got a 10-month-old daughter who seems to have a wonderful family here. So anyway, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Aloha.